So today we are here to discuss about Spring Boot. Okay, we have learned so far for almost 4 months. We have learned core Java very much sufficiently so that we will head on to learn some frameworks. We learn Java, we learn JavaScript, we learn Python. We learn so many languages, but it is of no use, not much of use if we do not learn some frameworks. Okay. For Node.js, you have learned as a front-end library. What you have learned? What have you learned for JavaScript?
React.
You have learned React. Okay. But React is not a full-fledged library framework. It is called as just library. Next.js is the React framework or JavaScript framework to build front end, to build UI. In the same way, we have Python Django. Django is the framework to use Python. In the same way, we have Spring Boot, which is a fully fledged, most popular framework. What is a framework? Can anybody answer? Have seen collections, you have seen JDBC, you must be knowing what is a framework.
So it is a how build a solution when we want, we can build top of it.
Yeah, it is a half-built solution which is already built. What is that half-built solution? What is that solution for? Yeah, go ahead. What is that solution?
Further implementation will be more easier.
Yeah, that already half-built solution is a recurring solution, recurring requirement, like connection to the database and a framework, some design patterns. All these things are recurring for each and every web application. Okay, these frameworks are mainly used to build web application. So those recurring requirements are already built. Okay, we got to build on top of it whatever we require for our according to our business logic. Okay, so that is the framework which helps the developer to develop an application speedily and with less work, less lines of code, and less effort, with more efficient, all followed best practices, and what with robust architecture. Okay, this is what a framework does. We cannot do it with normal JavaScript. We cannot do it with normal Java. We cannot do it with normal Python. We need some support. It is a structure which is already built. We got to fill it in, okay, according to our requirement. If needed, we can change the structure, but it's all pre-planned that this is how a web application should work, and this is how it works. It's all done. It's all the architecture is already made, and we should just implement it according to our business requirement. This is what a framework does for us. Okay, cool. Just to recap, I have done this session earlier also for how a web application works. Can anybody recap how a web application works?
Sir, I will try doing it. My terminology may be wrong. You have something called a web server where you create the front end web pages, and it's hosted on that web server. And when someone wants to access it, they go to your browser and provide that URL, which redirects to that page. And then based on the response, you get the page displayed on your local system. And Yeah, that's the understanding, sir.
Okay, cool, good. So first thing comes as Anant told that something called as web server. It's a machine. It's not something which is above the clouds. Even clouds are also machines, guys. Okay, it's a huge machine. You can think of it where our website. There is something called as website. Okay, website is hosted. Okay, one website comprises of multiple files, multiple folders, code, everything. Okay, that website will have multiple application, can have multiple application. Okay, one web application, for example, those applications that is running on web servers are called as web applications. Okay, and for the client side, to access those web applications, we have something called as browsers. Okay, so browsers are local machine applications which provides the connectivity, which acts as an interface between our between us as users and the applications that are hosted in the on the internet. Okay, so we send something. What is that called as?
Request.
Yeah, we send some request. Okay, and what do we get if our request is good and correct?
Response.
Response. Okay, as clients using the local machine application, which is called as browser. It may be Chrome, it may be Mozilla Firefox, it may be our Microsoft Edge. Okay, using these different kinds of browsers, we send request to the web server where our web applications are hosted. Using what? How do we send the request? How do we send the request?
Using API calls.
API calls, okay. That is some kind of what? A function return. But what is that we actually use to send request?
The address of the web server.
Yeah, what is that? It's called
URL.
Yeah, URL. That implements what?
Some protocol, sir.
Yeah, which protocol?
Depends on the starting part of that URL. I don't know, sir.
No. Generally we use which protocol?
HTTP.
HTTP or HTTPS. Okay, we use this protocol. There is the standard protocol. Okay, there is this protocol doesn't differ much. There is something called as RESTful APIs. For RESTful APIs, we use HTTP protocols only. For there is another kind of writing API which is called as GraphQL. For that we use different protocols. So, but for RESTful APIs, whatever we write, for example, the two programs running on the same machine in our local, we use HTTPS /localhost 3000 on which your React application runs. And your 8080 on which your Spring application runs. All these uses the same protocol, which is HTTP. Okay, and to use this protocol, we use something called as URL, which stands for what? URL stands for Universal
Resource link.
Resource Locator. Okay, URL stands for Universal Resource Locator, which is a string which is in some kind of human readable form, which makes us to understand, okay, this URL is for this website. Okay, earlier we used to use something called as IP address, and those things were used to locate that resource in the website, in the web server. But nowadays we have this particular thing which is called as URL in short form, which is mapped to so and so IP address using what? I have talked about this.
DNS.
Yeah, exactly. So there are domain name servers for this domain name, this IP address. Okay, so this kind of mapping is done by who?
Service providers.
Nope. Mapping of domain names to these URLs done by who? Not remembering.
No, sir.
Something called as spider bot search engine.
So that is used to understand which URL goes to which MAC address, but the list is present
Yeah,
within the service providers.
list is list is present within the service provider, but who does that?
That's your web browser's background, some web spider
No,
crawler.
not by web browsers. It's by web browser is different. Google Chrome is different. Google search engine is different.
Okay, sir.
So that crawling is done by Google search engine, and it crawls when some this thing, some new website or web application enters some ISPs. You have to acquire some website, host it on that. When a new application is hosted on some ISPs, these websites are provided by those ISPs. So Google search engine will crawl for all these newly added web application, and it chooses the web address or your URL and maps to the IP address and everything. So this job is done by this crawling mechanism of Google engine or any other engines for that matter.
Okay,
Okay.
sir.
So we as an user, I sit in front of the browser, I send the request using something called as URL, and that URL is mapped to some IP address, and that hits that address of the web server, fetches the data from that web server, and whatever we see in front of us, it is called as what application?
Web application.
Yeah, web application. But whatever we see is what? Whatever we see on the browser is what? Front end application. Okay, which helps user to interact with the web application. So using that front end application, we interact with the data which is hidden or which is secured behind, and to interact with the data, we need some middleman. We should not allow users to interact with data directly. So that we use something called as which application?
Front end.
No. Front end is allowed to interact with user, but use that front end directly connected to the user. So we should not allow this front end to interact with data. So for that, in the middle, we should have something. What is that?
Backend application.
Backend application. So front-end application is also called as client-side application, and this backend application is also called as server-side application, and we have data. We have client-side application, then we have server-side application, then we have database. So this complete stack is called as full stack. As a client, I send the request using client-side application, and this server-side application or backend application processes the request from the client, which is sent through client-side application, and interacts and does some business logic and everything, and queries the database, either updates or retrieves or deletes or creates or anything that is needed according to the business logic, and sends back the response to the client-side application, which is useful for the client. This is how a web application works. Clear? Any doubts?
No, sir.
So as a client-side application, we have already learned HTML as a client-side technologies. So to say, we have learned HTML, we have learned CSS for styling, we have learned JavaScript. More upon that, we have learned React, and using all the React hooks and those things, we have learned all those things. But as a server-side application, we have just learned core Java, which is exactly used for writing business logic. Whatever we have learned till now in Java is that how to write business logic, but we have not yet learned how to create the server-side application and listen to the client-side application, process some business logic, talk to database, and send back the response. So this is what we are going to learn in another 10 to 15 days, and then we will find out. Any doubts here? Any questions?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Everybody clear? This is where our Spring Boot comes handy to create server-side application, listen to the client-side request, process that request, talk to database, fetch some data, do some calculations, and send back the response as user needs it. Okay, cool. So shall we begin our Spring Boot?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So let me share my screen. Before Spring Boot got introduced, we had something called as Spring Framework. Okay, even before Spring Framework, there was multiple technologies that was used to achieve one requirement. Okay, what is that main requirement? Web application. So web application, why it got so much of importance? Because on booming of internet, if you have some mobile applications or standalone applications on, or your desktop applications or your embedded applications, those applications could run on a particular machine. Okay, some of the apps run, for example, some of the apps run on Android only. Some of the applications run on iOS only. Some of the applications run on Linux only. Some of the applications run on Windows only. So, but they all form as standalone applications. But when coming to web application, if you just have a connectivity to internet and a browser, it runs on all sorts of machines that is possible. Okay, That is why web applications gained so much of importance. And to develop those applications, Java was the pioneers of developing those web applications. And using Java was just kind of writing business logic, core Java. But we had to configure many more things to make web application work. Okay, we had to write so much of XML files. We had to configure databases using XML files. We had to configure build tools like Maven. Okay, Maven also is a kind of XML. So we had to do multiple things to achieve this requirement of building web application. So what people thought is, why can't we build a framework which take care of bringing all these technologies coming together to achieve the web application development faster. Okay, thinking like that, they came up with some framework called as Spring. Spring is a very popular Java Enterprise Edition framework to build mainly web applications and enterprise applications. Enterprise applications means those are also a kind of web application which is which is more sophisticated and dedicated to some organizations, okay, to some government, to some enterprise. Those applications are called as enterprise applications. And why Spring became so popular? Because it used some very good and best practice technologies which made our application robust and secure. And those technologies are, those concepts are, some of those are dependency injection. You already know what is dependency injection. I hope I have told this when we used to discuss on polymorphism, why we should not hard code some objects, some dependencies in the classes, almost all the dependencies in the classes. Suppose a person has a car, we should not create the car object inside the person class. That makes the code what coupled? Tightly coupled. Instead, what we should do? Instead, what we should do?
Create objects based on request.
We should inject the object during the use of that class. We should inject the state, right? That is what is called as in the base dependency injection. We have learned all these super best practices in the beginning itself, so that it becomes easier when we step into this framework. Our Spring framework uses the same technology or same principle of dependency injection, which is super helpful. We'll see how it is done. Okay, then it is easy to use with powerful databases with very much transaction management capabilities, and it simplifies the integration with some Java frameworks. As I told earlier, we used to use JDBC, we used to use struts, we used to use Hibernate, and we used to use Maven. So different technologies we used to use. We had to bring them together forcefully and make them work together to achieve the requirement. But Spring simplifies it very much, and it is very much easier to integrate all those like JPA or Hibernate and struts and Maven. Everything we can integrate easily. Then it is a state of art, means it is a kind of well suited for building web application using MVC framework. Okay, these are the most popular characteristics of Spring framework, which helped a developer to develop a web application easily. Then we have, we do not understand these things. What do you mean by configurations? How we used to do it? Because we have not done those configurations. If you have watched some of the videos on servlets in our portal, it's a kind of outdated. If you watch it and see how dependencies were or how the configurations were used to be done, you will understand the importance of this Spring framework. Since we have not done that, we do not understand it, but this is why the Spring framework came up, and to do much more, SpringBoot came up. Okay, so using just a normal Spring MVC, we had to do multiple configurations yet. We had to do configurations for component scan, dispatcher servlet, resolver, web jars. We had to add multiple jars, and to connect with database, we had to configure a data source, and we had to create entities and transaction managers like that. And for messaging, we had to use message or configure message queue configurations and NoSQL database configurations. A lot of configurations had to be done using a normal framework also. Okay, what Spring did is it brought all the technologies together and it wrapped up in one single place. And even then, we had to do multiple configurations to make it work. But what SpringBoot did was it automated all those configurations, or it built a boilerplate. Okay, you need to interact with database using JPA, right? Okay, you need all these dependencies. You take it, you add this to this build path. You also even we do not need to add it. The starter project, how we are going to create. As you create your React app, it downloads and adds all the dependencies that is needed. You just do npm install axios. It will install all the axios dependencies to your node modules. You install Tailwind CSS. It installs or it downloads all the required dependencies to work with Tailwind CSS. In the same way, SpringBoot gave us that particular freedom. I need to implement Spring Web MVC. Okay, you need to implement these things. For that, you need dispatcher servlet. For that, you need embedded server, example Tomcat. Okay, you need some MVC design pattern. You take this. This is all embedded now inside your project itself. I'll show how to do that. So SpringBoot enabled this. We need to interact with database using Hibernate or JPA. Okay, you have this plugin. You just add this. Then it will create that. It is easier to interact with database using JPA. Okay, this is how SpringBoot automated so many things and gave us the boilerplate. On top of it, we can just focus on our business logic. Okay, so SpringBoot is an extension for Spring framework, which eliminates the boilerplate configurations required for setting up a Spring application. This is the main and major advantage of SpringBoot. It gives the boilerplate. You will see as we create a React project or Next.js project using a command line interface or just a few commands, in the same way we can do it, or even easier, we can do it using something called as Spring Starter projects. Okay, so what are all the key features of SpringBoot? SpringBoot, as I told, it has Spring starters. Okay, you have to start your application, your web application, and you have in your mind, I have to start my web application using MVC, using JPA, and using some test tools, and some actuators like that. You all have this as plugins. Okay. Then you have something called as auto configuration. We will talk about this. What is this auto configuration? And elegant configuration management, like you do not need to explicitly write configurations for many of the things. You can write if needed. Okay. Then SpringBoot actuator, which helps you to test and auto run the application, and embedded servlets. Okay, embedded servlets and embedded Tomcat server or any other, some of the other servers. So you can just read these things. I have told you, like SpringBoot starter data JPA is a starter project, starter module, and in the same way, SpringBoot starter web is a starter web plugin. Then you have, which also includes WebMVC, Spring WebMVC, and JSON to object converter, which is called as Jackson JSON. It converts, the request goes in the form of JSON to the server side. It converts it into object, and the object that is created is converted back to JSON and sent as the response. So this is how we will create, or we will use these starter projects to build the boilerplate of Spring Boot project. And we have auto configurations. It sees that whatever dependencies that we need, it is all available in the class path. As we added, if you remember, as we added our JDBC driver jar file to the class path of our project, in the same way, Spring Boot auto configuration sees that whether all the dependencies that is required is added to the class path, whether a particular Spring Bean means whatever we create in React is considered to be what? Component, exactly. In the same way, whatever classes we create in Spring is also considered as components. Those components are called as beans. Okay, don't get confused with bean class, a normal bean class and Spring Beans. The different varieties of classes that we create, and we make it as the part of the Spring application. Those components are called as Spring Beans. Whether those beans are present or not, all these things are taken care of Spring Boot on auto configuration capability. Okay. Then we have, as I told, elegant configuration management. It manages all the configuration that is required. Then Spring Boot actuator will provide for application automatic application running, and also for testing the Spring Boot application. Okay. Then we have easy to use embedded servlet. Earlier, what we had to do is we used to write the servlet applications, but we had to download explicitly something called as Tomcat server. We had something else, Ruby, not Ruby, some other servers which explicitly runs our which is exactly run only Java applications. Those servers we needed to download and run that server. Upon that server, we had to run our Java application. But this Spring Boot will have embedded servers like Tomcat. Yeah, it's here. Wildfly. There are some other. I just forgot those names. Okay, I remember it. Some other servers we had to download. Any one server for that matter. So we had to download it. We had to run that server or add that server to our project. Then we had to run our application. But with Spring Boot, we just need to we just run it as a normal Java application. and internally Spring Boot runs the server and it runs our application on top of that server. So these are all the main key features of Spring Boot. Then shall we see how to create the first project of Spring Boot using Spring Boot starter project? Any
Yes, sir.
doubts here? Any questions?
Hello,
Yeah.
sir. Could you please explain what is dispatcher servlet?
Dispatcher servlet is something called something which dispatches which receives the response from the client and dispatches. It is also a program. It finds some it maps to that URL. Okay, you are sending the request. Consider you have some URL like localhost localhost 8080. What happened? For example, localhost something like this. Okay. Students. When you hit this, you are running the server in this port localhost 8080 where your Java application is hosted. Okay. When you hit on this URL, this request is first sent to the dispatcher servlet, and this dispatcher servlet will have the list of URLs that your Java application or Spring servlet application or JSP application. We used to use these kind of things before Spring Boot. We used to use servlets, we used to use JSP, we used to use Spring. Now after Spring Boot, this is all automated. We do not use this explicitly, but what dispatcher servlet does is it maps the request to this URL where it is defined. For this, we define the URL, we define that API endpoint. For this API endpoint, this function should run. Okay, this dispatcher servlet will map to that particular URL, means it dispatches the request to respective URLs that it needs to go. Okay, this is what dispatcher servlet does. Clear?
Yes, sir. I have one more query.
Yeah.
In browser, we are searching like, can you please go to next section, localhost 8080?
Yes.
Here I'm typing students with the spelling mistakes. Okay,
Yeah.
student is the endpoint in the controller class. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm typing with the spelling mistake. How it will be backend process will be going to happen? Because endpoint is students in the controller class, but
yeah,
here it is a spelling mistake.
What happens when you write some bad URLs or search for URL that is not present? You get what error? You get page not found error, right? You get the same error even here. This particular URL, this address is not present in this server. You get that error. Okay.
Okay.
All these things are managed by Spring Boot automatically. When you learn Spring Boot, you will get to know this. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Good. Good. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. So there are 4 different ways of creating Spring Boot project, but we will see the easiest and most sophisticated way of creating Spring Boot using Spring Initializer. Okay. So create that, which is present in spring.starter.io. Okay, start.spring.io. So if you go to this website, you will see something like this. Can you see this?
Yes.
So this is called as Spring Initializer. we can create the production grade project just by selecting some of the options and adding some dependencies. And we just have to write some business logic. Everything else will be taken care of this Spring initializer itself. Okay, so as a build tool, we will select Maven. Okay, because it is a bit quite lightweight. And as a programming language, we select Java, and we will select that particular Spring Boot version, which is not a snapshot. We can select this RC2, but it is not so fully fledged release. But this thing, which doesn't have anything in the bracket, snapshot is for testing. These are all the testing versions, which is released for testing. Okay, we'll not select those things. We'll select only those version, which is, we can select this or this. This is the latest version, which is full-fledged release. Okay, we'll select this, and we will select something. Then we have to give the group and artifact ID. Group name is something like package name, and artifact is something called as something similar to class name, but they are not package or class name. They are some identifiers for our project. Okay, so I'll create some com dot maha dot uttara dot Spring Boot. Okay, then we will create some name, learn Spring Boot. Okay, so packaging, we should select jar, not a bar. Then we will select the latest version of Java, which is Java 21, and be careful that Spring Boot 3, okay, it works only with, or it is compatible only with Java 17 or higher version. Okay, Spring Boot 2 is compatible with 11 or 8 or 8 and above. Java 8 and above it is compatible with, but Spring Boot 3 is compatible with Java 17 and above. Okay, we'll select the latest version, then I'll select this, add dependencies. Okay, you see, so you have so many dependencies here. To build a web project, you have Spring Web. This is what we need to add. We add this. Okay, this is the only dependencies now we need. But if you want JDBC dependency, JDBC, okay, you have JDBC API or Spring Data JDBC. If you are using H2 database, which is an inbuilt provide or in-memory database, it is also called as, you can use this, or my MS SQL server driver, you can use this, and MySQL, I think MySQL driver, you have this. Okay, if you want to interact using JPA, okay, Spring Data JPA, it is called as it is the Java Persistence API. JPA stands for, it processes data in SQL stores with Java Persistence API using Spring Data and Hibernate. So you have all these dependencies in the starter project itself. Okay, this is the power of Spring Boot framework. Clear? So this is how you create. You select Maven as project build tool. You select Java as the language. You select the version of the Spring Boot, which is not a snapshot, especially. Then you give some group ID and artifact ID. Then you select the jar as the packaging option. Then Java version, better to select the latest version of Java. Add the dependency. Main dependency to create a web application is Spring Web. which is used to build web application, includes RESTful API, which helps us to define RESTful API. Applications using Spring MVC uses Apache Tomcat as the default embedded container or server. Okay, this is how we create the SpringBoot project. Any doubts? Any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, good. And here you just go and generate the file, generate the project. It will download you a zip file. Okay, you can just go there. It will download. Just close this. So we'll open it in the folder. Okay, we'll cut this and we'll copy this to some project here. Yes. Okay, and we will extract all. Extract all. So it is extracted. Now, how do we import this? How do we start coding this? How to see what are all there in this particular zip file which is extracted? To see that, we will open up the Eclipse. Okay. Any questions, guys, by the time Eclipse opens? So we will select some workspace, select this. Eclipse takes time. Yeah. Close all this thing. Okay. There already. So how do we import is this? We'll go to file. Shall we change the workspace? We'll change the workspace. Okay, we'll do it in JDBC because the same project is already there. Okay, how to import that project which we created just now using Spring Starter, Spring Initializer. Okay, so we will go to file and we tell import, and here we will select Maven. In Maven, we have to select existing Maven project. Okay, next. And here we have to browse. Inside browse, where was that? Now, SpringBoot starter, learn SpringBoot. This is what we created just now, and we select this folder. Okay. So you see this pom.xml is selected. Okay, then we'll tell finish. So you can see somewhere here how to hide this. Okay. So somewhere here, so it got imported. If you are importing this kind of project for the first time, it will take some time, guys. So whatever it is there is not this one, this one. You have got form.xml. These things we had to do manually before Spring Boot. Okay, we had to configure all these things. This is the dependency that we added, Spring Starter Web. Okay, and it also adds this starter test automatically. Okay, so if you add some other dependencies like data JPA or JDBC, it will reflect here. Or if you add it in the future, you can, if you want to add it in the future as per the requirement, you can add those dependencies here. Okay. So then, so it is not required. Just for your information, this XML file contains all the dependencies that is required for this project. Then where we have to code, we should start with here source/main/java. What we have here is got mixed up, I think. Let that be there. We can delete this. Just open up this. Delete this because it was not there. It was there most probably in the earlier application. So I'll delete this package. Okay, you will see something like this. Since I replaced that particular file, I think it got mixed up. So you will have this only this much. This is where your program, your Java code starts. This is where your Spring Boot application starts. Okay, this creates the Spring Boot context. You have at Spring Boot application annotation. This tells that this is a Spring Boot, and whatever classes or whatever subclasses that comes under this package is does belongs to Spring Boot application. Okay, but there are some annotations that we should add. So I'll just add it. So this is whatever we have is Spring Boot Spring application, which is to run this application, and we have this auto configure Spring Boot application. So this is the starting point of our application. If we just run this, it starts the server with Tomcat. How to run this? We just run it as run as Java application. You see, starting learn Spring Boot application using Java 20 with PID because I have only 20 in my system installed. So it is compatible, it is running, and Tomcat started on port 8080, okay, and started learn Spring Boot application in 3 seconds. So your your application got started, your web application is production ready. So this is the power of Spring Boot. This is how Spring Boot helps us creating production grade, developer friendly, less code applications. Clear? Any doubts?
So question, sir, if you go to a web browser and type localhost :8080, will it open in that web browser?
It will open, but since we have not defined any API endpoints, okay, you see, localhost 80, localhost :8080, it will give you a white label error, okay, white label error page. This is also generated by Spring Boot itself. This application has no explicit mapping for /error, so you are seeing this as a fallback. This is created by Spring Boot itself. So we have to define API endpoints. We have not defined those endpoints, so we are seeing this white label error. How to define those API endpoints? Shall we see that today itself, or shall we keep it for tomorrow?
Good choice.
What everybody tells. Shall we see a simple Hello World API endpoint?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So how to do that? So for that, we have to create a class. New class. I'll define it as to be another package. Hello. And I define it as hello controller. And I do not need a main or anything else. I'll just say finish. Okay, comes here. So this is the hello controller, and this since we are going to use REST API, that is a way of defining API. We have to make it as at REST controller, okay, which is imported from, which has to be imported from this org.springframework.web.bind.annotation package, okay. It forms a REST controller. Then we have to define the API endpoint. How to define that API endpoint? If we go to, for that, we have an annotation called as get mapping, okay. Get mapping, which is also comes from the same package. So we have to add that, and we have to tell the API endpoint, or define the API endpoint. How to define it as? So for /hello, localhost 8080/hello, I want to perform this function. What function? We have to tell that public string. We have to return a string which is hello world. Hello world. Okay. Then we will just return hello world. So we have to put it as string. Okay. So this is how we create an API endpoint telling that for this URL /hello localhost 8080/hello, we have to do this function. If we do not have this, we'll get, or if we type a wrong URL, we'll get an error. We'll see that we will stop the server. Okay. Stop it, and we will run it again. So it started. We'll go back and we'll type hello state 8080. Hello. You see, hello world. Got it? We have done the first, we have crossed the first phase of running the server and writing or defining an API. And when hitting that URL, our server is listening to this client. When we hit this URL, it is processing that request and sending back the response. Any doubts? If we type a wrong URL or URL which doesn't exist, I tell hello and hit enter. You see, this application has no explicit mapping for /error, or you have to define that error page. If you do not define that error page, this auto-generated, which is not found, page not found error, 404 error is coming up. Okay, this is what occurs when you type, when you request for that particular URL which doesn't exist. So if you type on a proper URL and hit enter, you get hello world. Clear?
Yes.
Any doubts? Any questions, guys? What did we do?
Hello. So,
yeah.
A few minutes back, you were telling the boilerplate code. What is the boilerplate code? For that, we need to externally add any dependencies or anything.
Sorry,
While
I did not
initializing the project. I'm not clear about the boilerplate code. In doc file.
Boilerplate code means I just showed you, right? I'll stop the server. Close this. You see this? Inside this Learn Spring Boot application, this is generated. Means the starter code is generated. Your pom.xml is configured. You have this pom.xml which is configured. These are all called as boilerplate code. Got it? And,
complete folders, we will call it as a boilerplate code.
Sorry?
A complete folder, like whatever project, whatever we have imported, complete folder, we will call it as a boilerplate code.
Boilerplate. Yes, exactly. And all the dependencies that is required to create a web MVC project is added to the class path, or all those jar files is added to the class path as the system library. So this entire thing which you get as a zip file, zip folder from the starter Spring Boot initializer called as boilerplate. Clear?
Okay. Yes, sir. And one more thing, guys, a component scan. Component scan. For that, do we need to? Yes. For components, what is the component scan? And for that, we need to add any dependencies, or automatically Spring Boot will take it.
Component scan means you added some some annotation here. Earlier in the just Spring, we used to use at component annotation, which would make it as a component of Spring Boot. But for now, we have got different annotations for that case. For example, if this particular class is acting as a controller or a REST API controller, we do not write this return exactly here. We just do not write just return a string here. We have to do some calculations and all. We do not do that in controller classes. We will create some classes which is called as service classes. Okay, this controller will flow to that service classes and do business logic, and to do data logic we have something called as repositories, and those repositories will do data logic. And to do all those things, all these things should become components. Okay, but we do not use that at component annotation now in Spring Boot 3. We use different annotations, like for controllers we use REST controller. Okay, for service classes we use at service annotation. For repositories we use repository classes, we use at repository annotations. These annotations tell Spring Boot that these are all the components of the Spring Boot. While running the Spring Boot application, it scans all the available components and takes it into its control. The Spring Boot takes all these components to the control and assigns the respective duties. Okay, this is what is called as component scan. Good question. Anything else?
Does that mean component scan? So if you see when we run localhost hello/hello as a URL, it prints that hello world, which is when you go to a granular level, which is a method, right? If we want to call any method, we have to create an object of it. So in case of Spring Boot, it is basically creating object of this hello controller and keep it ready as and when we call it, it will printing it the statement, right?
Exactly. So this hello /hello localhost 8080/hello request is sent to dispatcher servlet behind the scenes, and dispatcher, once we run this application, all the available URLs are listed by this dispatcher servlet, and it has the list, and as and when required, it creates the object, it calls those methods, and it is also it is called as auto configuration or auto wiring. Okay, it creates the objects on its own whenever it is needed. Okay, this is how it works behind the scene. It keeps everything ready and calls or in the case of a kind of component scan, it scans all the components and keeps it ready. Whenever we call it, it executes that function. Good. Anything else?
Sir, a very silly question. Sir, how is this a backend application you're developing? We are doing only front-end work now, sir, in this displaying hello world.
Where is it coming from? From where are we sending the request? From where are we sending the request? From the browser, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
where
sir.
is it going to? The request is going to
localhost 8080.
an application which is hosted on the port. Okay, hosted on the port 8080, which is running. That application is running in the port 8080. Means that is an application which is listening to the request, right?
Okay.
So I am just telling localhost 8080 do this. But if I tell forgot that syntax in Java 8, there is some. I do not want to return this. I want to return something like this. Long L equal to some random number I want to generate. Long math dot random of into 100. Okay. So I want to do this calculation plus L and just tell your random number is okay. Now I just stop the server because we have not installed the actuator. Where is that? Okay, it stopped and I run it again. Okay, so it started. I come back here and I hit enter again. You see, your random number is 62. I refresh the page. Now it's 8. I refresh the page. It's 1. Where is this happening? This calculation.
In that
Have we written
server.
any HTML?
No, sir. But we are
Have we
returning an
Yeah.
HTML, no, sir, like some sort of a p tag or something.
Exactly. It is happening inside or what? There is somewhere. Internally, it is returning an HTML template. No, it's not there. But
So, but
yeah.
yeah, sir, even in front end, our front end application is hosted on a web server, and when we give a request from our browser, it connects to the web server and then renders the UI for us. We are doing the
Yes.
same thing here also, no, sir. You're connecting to some server and rendering the UI in some different way.
But this particular thing, do we listen to any request from the front end in the front end application? Do you really write that if this is the URL, you send the response like this?
Yes, sir. We use that React router DOM package in React where we tell which component has to be rendered for which URL.
Okay, got your thing. But what are you exactly doing there? You are routing from one page to another page, right?
Correct.
On click of a button in the same application, right? In the same application, you are clicking on one button, but it is routing to another page of the same application. Okay, and you will get that data, whatever it is there, which might be static for now. You are not connected to database or anything like that. It is a static thing, right?
Yes, sir.
Everything happens in the front end itself. You are not telling that for this particular URL, you go to this server, you will see how to create those servers or you have seen how to create the API endpoint. You will see how to create the request from another server. You will create that React app which runs on localhost 3000. From localhost 3000 to localhost 8080, you will send the request and you will receive the response. Okay.
Okay, sir. I think I understand now.
Okay, cool. So this is the backend server application where it keeps listening to things from the client side. Okay, if you type this URL only, then it will do this calculations or execute these lines. Then it will return whatever needs to be returned according to this return statement or this calculation. Clear?
I have one question, Mahabal, sir.
Yep.
Can you please open that browser where you are rendering that hello world random generator? So here I think we can see the request and response in a inspect mode, right? So can we see that? What
Yeah, of
request?
course. You just see this. So in network, okay. You see, hello to hello endpoint, you are sending it. So it went and the status is 200. Status code is 200, means the request went on, which is running on localhost 8080 hello. The request URL is this, and request method is get, and status code is 200, which is successful, and that's it.
Okay, can we see the
Anything
response?
else? Yeah.
So this is coming from the server. That's our
Yeah.
SpringBoot.
Yeah.
Okay. And why are we using REST controller in specific?
REST controller tells that this class handles or defines API endpoints.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
And
Anything
when you
else?
say production ready, right? What does production ready attributes to? I mean,
You see, just this, you can host it, right? If you host it, it's ready. Just you have to write your business logic. It's already production ready, means it is ready to host, it is ready to use, but it is almost more than half built. Just need to add your business logic. If you add your business logic, it becomes a full-fledged application, and it is ready to host, ready to use. That is why it is called as production ready application.
okay.
If you just host this code, this application on some server, like if you have some GitHub account, you can use that GitHub account and host it, and it keeps listening to your what API call or your request. Okay, when you call this with proper URL, it listens and generates this random number.
Okay.
Clear? That is
Yes.
why it's called as production ready, developer friendly framework.
And one more thing you told as a dispatcher.
How many lines? Yeah, how many lines of code did we write
We
to
just
do this?
like 3 to 4 of lines of.
Right. So that is why it is called as production ready application. Yeah, you were asking something else.
So you told dispatcher servlet internally takes care of which one to be called. So
Yeah.
would you be explaining how?
Sorry, your voice got break.
So when you told dispatcher servlet will takes care of doing this component scan, right? So
yeah.
So will you going to explain how internally the dispatcher servlet works?
No, not needed. Not necessarily. It
Okay.
does that. That's it. How, we do not know. We need not care about it.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Anything else?
No.
Nice. So, yep, we have created our first Spring Boot application. Any doubts, guys? Until this?
No, sir.
Everybody clear? Hello, everybody. Is it going above your head? Did you get something?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. So tomorrow, what we do is how we are going to approach is we will build a small project, guys, to do a CRUD operation, use or build APIs to perform a CRUD operation. Okay, kind of building project will helps you. For that matter, any frameworks, we cannot teach these frameworks as we taught you how to code for loop, how to code while loop, how to use collections and all. We will build a small project upon this using this Spring Boot application. While building the project, we'll come across more and more Spring Boot annotations. Mainly, we have to remember some annotations and some file and folder structure. Okay, how we should code, and that is enough as the basic to learn or to develop a full stack application. If you know this much as a fresher, you are ready to go and tell that we know Spring Boot. We can develop in Spring Boot. Will not go very deep into, like, if we go on, we have so many things in Spring Boot itself. We do not want to do that. We have to know that Spring Boot works like this and how we can develop upon Spring Boot. What do? We do just this, right? We receive request from client, process that, we know how to build the logic upon the requirement and interact with database, fetch from database, and that's it. That is all what is required most basically. We have advanced features. We have advanced features in everything that we want to learn, but everything cannot be taught. Okay, we will see the very basic things, and we will try to build a full stack application if possible. I'll show you how to build a React application and a Spring Boot application and how to make them interact. Okay, and also we will use MySQL database. Clear? Any questions?
Sir, please post this recorded videos.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Okay, cool. Anything else? Any questions? Any doubts?
Previous recording also you can post it, I think.
Yeah, I have posted it yesterday.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you, guys. Thank you. If any doubts, we will see it tomorrow. Please come up with some questions. I'll try my best to resolve those things. Okay, cool.
Okay, so
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Bye.